start with an introduction of Dr. Lafayette. Let's see, that's why all of us are here. I think most of you are aware of who he is, but let me just tell you a little bit about him. He is a distinguished senior scholar in residence emeritus at Emory University. He's a legendary civil rights activist, minister, educator, lecturer, and world-leading authority on the strategy of nonviolent social change. He helped found the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, was a leader in the Nashville movement and the Freedom Rides, served as a leading strategist for the Selma movement. He was appointed National Program Administrator for Southern Christian Leadership Conference and National Coordinator of the 1968 Poor People's Campaign, along with Dr. Martin Luther King. He's well-educated, has traveled extensively, established Kingian nonviolence training institutes around the world, Colombia, South Africa, Nigeria, and so on. He's got a number of publications, a manual for nonviolence, as well as In Peace and Freedom, My Journey to Selma. He's received literally hundreds of awards. He's celebrated nationally and internationally by institutions of every size. He currently serves as the board chair for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and mentors and serves as honorary board chair for the Connecticut Center of Nonviolence, which is another one of our sponsors. And just to reiterate before we take down the slide, there are 5 libraries who got together to bring this presentation to you and the Center for Nonviolence. So I thank everyone for being here. I thank all my fellow librarians for all the work and coordination we did and cooperation to make this happen. And from my viewpoint, it shows the power of libraries. So with that, I think we'll get started. Welcome, Dr. Lafayette. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
So let me ask you, I mean, when you were pretty young when you began working in the civil rights movement, I think even your parents didn't even want you to participate. We're not too thrilled about that. So I'm curious, does this give us a little run through of, what were some of the factors, the impulses and the emotions that compelled you to protest, that compelled you to act?
Well, I grew up in Tampa, Florida, and I was born in Ybor City there, which is one of the communities in Tampa. And it's, might say, a multicultural community. We have had Italians, we had Jewish people, African Americans, West Indians, go down the line. So I had a chance to interact with people. As children, we played together, but as we got older, we were separated because we went to different schools. And so therefore, the idea of segregation was very prominent in my life and culture as a kid. My grandmother and I used to travel together, and we were on a streetcar. And what happened is that in those days, and I'm talking about back in like 1947, my grandmother and I were traveling, and we would have to enter the front door of the streetcar, we call it, and we would put our money in the receptacle for the fare. And then we would have to get off the streetcar and walk on the side in the streets to enter the back door. And that's what Black people had to do. They couldn't go straight down, even in terms of, although it was segregated, we could not even go down the aisle of the streetcar. So this one time, my grandmother and I were traveling together, and they used to say I was always on her dress tail, because I used to be with her everywhere she went as a little boy. And I learned a lot from her. I used to run ahead of her and jump on the steps of the streetcar because if you hold down the steps, you could keep the door open. And sometimes the driver would take off after you gave your money and you were walking. So that was one of the things I did in order to make sure we were able to enter the rear door. This one time occasion, my grandmother and I were traveling, and this happened. And I ran ahead, jumped on the steps, the back steps, and she was running, but she had high heel shoes on, and her heels got caught in the cracks around the track, and she fell, boom, right in the middle of the street. Oh my goodness! That was a little skinny fellow, and I jumped off of my the steps and tried to pull her up, but nothing I could do because I was a little fella that I felt like a sword had cut me in half. And I remember this just as vividly. I said to myself, when I get grown, I'm going to do something about this problem. I could not wait to get grown. So it was already uh, a commitment I'd made to myself. So when we got started in Nashville with the movement there, and I was John Lewis's roommate, it always like I had jobs. You know, I was a librarian, assistant librarian, and I used to wash the janitor on the second floor and all that. So I was busy working. I always had more than one job. And John Lewis was trying to get me to go to these workshops. It's like back in 1959. I said, I don't need any more work. I already got enough work to do. I'm not interested in any workshops. Okay? But he was very persuasive, as you know, reading his history. And he convinced me to go. And I said, okay, I'm going to go just so I could, say I went. And that's going to be the end of it. Okay? But when I got there, and James Lawson Jr. was the person who was carrying these workshops on, I said, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. Okay? And that training was the thing that really got me going. And I just really latched onto it. All the jobs I had, hey, this was my priority. And that's how I really got involved in the sit-ins in Nashville. And those sit-ins really made all the difference because I learned how to uh, develop leadership, how to develop strategy, and how to bring about changes. And that's what I was interested in, changing the segregation laws, but the lunch counters and looking at the possibility of all of the other things that were possible there in Nashville. And we were just very fortunate. C.T. Vivian and Jim Bevel and Diane Nash and all of us were together. Angela and Butler and Rip Padden and um, Paul Brooks and Catherine Burks, and you can just go down the list of all of those who were involved. And we had a central committee. We actually desegregated our lunch counters in about 3 months. And when SNCC was formed and we went to Raleigh, North Carolina, it was no coincidence that our group, had a lot of experience and success. In fact, Marion Barry was the first chairman of SNCC because he was a graduate student and he was one of the leaders in the Nashville movement. And so we had Marion Barry one year, then we had Chuck McDougall, and then we had John Lewis. And it was no coincidence that John Lewis sort of, emerged as a leader because he was the president of his class when he was, class president, and he ended up being president of the student body. Okay. And he had that ability to give um, confidence and support to good confidence to people and good support. for causes, that kind of thing. So we were very fortunate. C.T. Vivian was actually my homiletics teacher. He was assistant to the homiletics teacher there, Kelly Miller Smith Jr., Senior. So we were really surrounded by adults who were involved in the movement, and that's one of the reasons that gave us the confidence. Kelly Miller Smith was the chairman for the local chapter of Martin Luther King's organization, okay, the Nashville Christian Leadership Council. And he was, like I said, a professor there at the American Baptist Theological Seminary. Yeah. And then you had the head of the NAACP, Dr. Grimmett, who was our church history, professor. So uh, we were surrounded by leaders already. So in addition to getting our training very specifically, we had examples and models of local leadership. That's the thing that made the difference in terms of the group that came out of Nashville. It was no coincidence. It was cultivation and examples and models of leadership. So in addition to our training, we had examples there in front of us. So we had an advantage there. In fact, some people don't know this, but in addition to desegregating the lunch counters in 1960, we also desegregated the movie theaters. There were 5 downtown movie theaters that were white, basically, and blacks could go to the theater, but they had to sit in the balcony. So that meant you had to go outside sometimes up the fire escape and sit in the balcony of the theaters. And so we desegregated the theaters as well. And John Lewis and I, we desegregated, well, the other place we desegregated was the Greyhound bus station because the Greyhound bus station was downtown Nashville and had lunch counters. So we didn't exclude them. We had sit-ins at the lunch counters at the Greyhound bus station. So when we desegregated lunch counters downtown, the bus station was included. So it didn't make any sense to have segregated, integrated lunch counters at the bus station and segregated restrooms or waiting rooms. So the entire bus station was desegregated in 1960. So Christmas vacation of 1960, John Lewis and I decided that we were going to sit on the front of the bus because we're going from uh, Nashville. He was going to Troy, Alabama, and I was going to Florida. So when we sat behind the driver, I sat behind the driver and John Lewis sat on the other side, front seats. The driver told us to leave and go to the back because that's to enforce, segregation. Because you can have a policeman on every bus, so the bus driver was the one that implemented the policy, the law. So we didn't pay any attention to him. So he went and tried to get a policeman out of the bus station, all right, which was already integrated, to come and force us to go to the back of the bus. No policeman would come. That didn't make sense. Got an integrated bus station, and then you have policemen tell you got to sit on the back of the bus. No. So we desegregated the buses, the bus, all the way from Nashville on down to Troy, Alabama for John Lewis, and that bus also went to Tallahassee with me, and then I had to change and going into Tampa. But the point I'm making here is that while you focus on a specific issue that you want to change, don't neglect the implication and the impact that might have on changing the entire conditions that exist. So therefore, you are able to have a sweeping effect, but you can't do everything at one time. Okay? You have to look at the relationship between one issue and another. So we were able to get all those things done in Nashville within a short period of time. And so therefore, we were able to show that using nonviolence, the reason we were able to make the change is because we were able to win over the masses of white people because they're the ones who had the power to make the change. We were sitting in the lunch counters, and those of us on the central committee, which was made up of student leaders from all the colleges, we had a negotiating team. So we would go and negotiate with the manager, say of Harvey's department store, in his boardroom. And this one time we were sitting there waiting to have our negotiations, and it had been months that we've been talking, but others were sitting in all over. And the manager came in and he said, "What would y'all like to have for lunch?" And that was the first time that he had ever asked us, offered us lunch. And some of those on the negotiating team, they cringed. So I looked at the manager and I said, "Whatever you're going to have is fine with us. You're going to have hot dogs, hamburgers, cokes, whatever. It's whatever you want to order. We'll eat the same thing." Because I didn't want to waste time with all this going around, and some people not. Time the manager left, they looked at me and they said, "Do you think that we are going to sit up here and eat with the man while the others are downstairs on the lunch counters not being served?" I said, "Wait just a minute. Always examine new information and new, uh, decision making." That was the first time he offered us lunch. And what were we going to be talking about? We're going to sit down with him, and what do you think the subject's going to be? Eating together. Yeah. So we already fulfilled as we, okay, we're being filled. Okay, eating. That's our goal. So let's at least, if we could eat up here together, then, and what do we think we're going to be talking about? Integration down, eating together downstairs. So I said, wait, let's not argue here. Let's wait till we get back to our meetings. So they looked at me, and the negotiating team, they just got frustrated with me. But that's okay. All right. Always explore new things and see can you get the essence of them. Don't look at the outside, trying to get the insight rather than simply eyesight. What was in the mind of that manager when he offered us lunch? That's what I wanted to know. He came back in, and the next thing that happened before he came in was the waiter. He was black, the porter they called him, and he had his tray and he had all the sandwiches and lunch and things. The manager hadn't come in yet, and he looked and he saw these black students here, and he had a tray full of food. Nobody black had ever eaten up there, and he thought he was in the wrong place. He looked at his ticket, and then he backed up and looked at the the, the number on the door to make sure he was in the right room. And I told him, I said, this is the right place. They ordered lunch for us. Please come in, put the lunch down. So anyway, he put the tray down, but he had sweat, perspiration popping off his head because he thought maybe he might have gotten fired from his job for serving the wrong people. You could tell he was very nervous. Then the manager came in, and the manager saw, and I grabbed my sandwich. I didn't eat it now. I just grabbed it so I could be courteous, the fact that he'd ordered lunch for us, we'll see what's going to happen next. And he looked at us and he saw that nobody had touched their food. And their arms were folded as if they're not going to touch the food. He said, well, I don't know what you were thinking, but uh, uh, I've decided I'm going to desegregate my lunch counters. What? This white manager had decided he was going to desegregate lunch counters. And you know what our reaction was? No, you can't do that. Because you, as a manager of this Harvey's department store, if you desegregate your lunch counters without the others, you are going to find out that your wife will not be invited to any more showers, your kids won't get invited to birthday parties, and you won't get invited to be on the golf team, the country club, or whatever. No. And they'll find a way to get you out of town, get you fired from your job. No. Now, what you can do is we'll continue to sit in, and you can go to the country club, you can go to the Chamber of Commerce, go to the mayor, all your business dealings and social groups, and convince them to come to the same conclusion that you've come to. So the goal of nonviolence is to win people over. Yes. So while he was doing that, it so happened that Easter was coming up, and we intensified our boycott. So it wasn't just sitting in, but it was boycotting downtown. Strong economic withdrawal. We said we're not going to buy downtown if we can't eat on an equal level. So with his working from the inside and we are working from the outside, we were able to put the power together. And I'll say this, and then we can get into other issues. Martin Luther King had one simple definition for power. It was very syllable words and stuff Martin Luther King used. But when he described power, it's very simple. You know what his definition of power was? Power for Martin Luther King was the ability to either supply needed resources or to withdraw needed resources. That was the definition of power. So in any movement, if you're going to bring about change, you've got to look at where is the power, and then what do we need to do to withdraw that power, or if necessary, supply that power. So that's one of the key things that happened in every movement we had. We had to identify that. And that was one of the key things that made the difference in terms of the change that took place. Listen, all of the decisions that were made to change things white people made those decisions. In the Civil Rights Bill, the Voter Rights Bill, that was all in Congress. We didn't have any black folks who were speaking of in terms of numbers. It was the white people who decided that they wanted to live in a better community, a better country. They wanted to be a better example to the world. Yes. And so therefore they became open to change. And that's the whole idea, that unless you're able to win the sympathy, if not the active support of the majority, you cannot bring about change.
Hmm. So let me ask you, some of these situations were easier than others, but often you were in the face of enormous violence, and you and others, and you persevered. So what held you up? How did you cultivate a being of nonviolence? I mean, this is something that one is not just, you know, this is something someone is embodying. And, what happened in the civil rights era was extraordinary.
Yes, and John Lewis is a good example. I used to really just felt so, you know, grieved when I knew there was a demonstration going on, because John Lewis was going to be part of it, wherever it was, in Mississippi, and it was going to be in Alabama or wherever. He would just join in. He'd put his head there as well as his heart. And so I've had those experiences too, but I chose to always work in a way that I could help develop leadership, because that was one of the key areas. And so I made a conscious decision that that was going to be my focus. And I can talk more about that later. But I'll give you this one example in Selma, Alabama, since that's one of the places you want me to talk about. And if you want to know the more about how it started and that kind of thing, my book, which you showed up earlier, will give you the beginnings of the Selma movement, how it really got started, and what went into building that movement. And so nobody wanted to go to Selma, Alabama, because I went down to Atlanta to get my assignment, because I wanted to take off a couple of years out of college and get some practical experience, like going to the Peace Corps, Vista Volunteers or whatever. I wanted to go and work for SNCC. We wanted to staff people, and I wanted to direct one of these voter registration projects. When I got to Atlanta, they told me they didn't have any more. So, nothing you can do. Well, a couple other things happened. They sent me off to raise some money to get Deion Diamond out of jail and stuff like that. It's all in the book. But when I returned to get my assignment, they told me that no, all the assignments had been taken up. And they had an X through Selma, Alabama. So I said, what are you talking about here? Why are you not going to Selma? And they said that we already sent 2 teams there separately, and they came back from Selma after spending some time there. And they said that nothing could be done in Selma. Can't accomplish anything. I said, what? You had Montgomery, Alabama? That's in Alabama. And you had Birmingham? That's in Alabama. Okay. You had Tuskegee earlier, with the gerrymandering and all that. That's Selma. That's in Alabama. Why is it now you can't have a voter registration, movement in Selma, Alabama? 2 teams said the same thing. They went down separately. and came back, and they said that the white people were too mean and the black folks were too scared. These two teams. And these were SNCC people who had, gone on freedom rides and sit-ins, and they gotten beaten up in jail and so, but they come to that conclusion. So James Foreman, who was National Secretary of Secretary of SNCC, said, "You want to go take a look at it? You can." Said, "No, I don't want to go take a look at it. I'll take it." So that's how I got to Selma. They were expecting nothing. Okay. Well, I did some research before I got there, and I wanted to see how is it that these white folks were considered so mean compared to other white folks everywhere else. I mean, why is it? Well, I did the study, and I can tell you why they came to that conclusion. But I did my research before I got there. But one of the things happened when I was there was that I was coming home from a mass meeting one night, and I parked in my driveway, and I was getting some flyers or something out of the back seat. I had a '48 Chevrolet that Julian Bond had gotten for me, and he got that. Julian Bond got me this '48 Chevrolet, and gave all the others these new cars and stuff. And I said, "What do you?" He said, "Just wait, don't say anything." And he told me this was the best car that I needed for going in rural areas of Alabama and places like that. If I was, I was going to go there. And so I took him at his word. I didn't argue, you know, with him. So I drove up in front of my house, and there was a car parked across the street. And there were two white men. One was under the hood of the car, the other was under the steering wheel. And I didn't pay any attention to them because, down in my neighborhood, further down the street, there was a lot of white families, only white families really. We were just on the edge, block. And I heard these footsteps coming behind me. And it was in June, and I could hear there were a lot of leaves on the ground, so I could hear the footsteps coming as the leaves were cracking. So I turned around and I looked, and there was this huge guy, white guy with had a crew cut hair or whatever, and sleeves rolled up on his arms. And he looked at me and he said, "Buddy, how much would you charge me to give me a push?" I said, "Won't charge you anything. Give you a push." I was glad that's all he wanted, a push. So I got my car and backed it up and got behind his car and lined up. And while I was waiting for him to get in the car with the driver, he was stooping down looking at the bumpers. So I rolled the window down. I said, "Do the bumpers match?" And he said, "Well, you need to take a look. Come out and take a look." I had a '48 Chevrolet. Bumper guards that high. They could push a truck. So I quickly jumped out because it was late at night. And when I put my head down, he hit me. Boom! Knocked me on the ground. I got back up, and I had to hold my chin up to see him. And I looked right at his eyes, and he all of me. There's scars right there. Yeah, that's what that's all about. He hit me again, and I raised my head, and I got up. And then he hit me the third time in the middle of the head. Okay? That's supposed to be your soft spot, but I don't have a soft spot. My head is, he had done no research. My mother would have told him, that I didn't have any soft spots. Okay? And I went back down on the ground again when I got up. He got nervous because he was supposed to knock me out the first go round. So he pointed his gun at me. And that's what he was hitting me with, a gun. I didn't know that was a gun. So I realized that he was going to shoot. because he stopped backing up towards his car. So I turned my back on him and I yelled for my neighbor. We call him Red. He's a light-skinned black person. Sometimes we call him Red. And I yelled, Red, Red, Red. And Red had gone to the military, and Red came out of the across the banister with a rifle. Because he'd been watching us earlier, but once I got, kind of looked like everything was working out okay, Red went back in. But he'd been watching us out of the window at first. And he came across with a rifle. He'd gone to Korea and Vietnam. He was a Spartan, And what he did was I blocked him from shooting the guy who had the gun on me. Now, this is the point of the story. I wanted to make sure that Red did not shoot him. I put my body between the guy who had the gun on my back and Red, who had the rifle, trying to save my life by killing the other person. No, I wouldn't let him do that. So every time he would try to go around me, I blocked Red. I said, don't shoot, don't shoot. No. Now I saved the life of the guy who was gonna kill me. That is the essence of nonviolence. You have the power to save life, not to lose life. And because of my actions, I was able to save 3 lives. Because had Red shot that man, they would have come after him, and not just law enforcement. Okay? So the point is, nonviolence is practical. Yes, you give your life because you feel that your life is valuable and is worthwhile. And the worth of your life is not how much you can accumulate for yourself, valuables. No, your life is a value in itself. Not the things that you have, material things, but your life is valuable because of what you can give to others that will help them. Yes, how valuable are you to others? That measures your value. Yes. So in our teachings in nonviolence, we redefined ourselves and revalue ourselves. And our worth becomes not material things, but it's the gifts that we can give to others that will make their lives worthwhile. We're not going to live forever. No. But while we're alive, we can give forever. Even after we've gone, people can treasure what we have given them and not just material things, but greater treasures to make their lives worthwhile. So that's what nonviolence is all about.
Very powerful. So let me fast forward a little bit. As you said, you were involved in some of the most iconic civil rights era action, freedom rides, March to Selma. The work was hard. Sometimes it was pretty dangerous. And I think most people would agree that certain laws were dismantled, new rights gained, supported. Yet here we are 50 years, 60 years later, and we see people of color, and not just Black people, still worrying about walking down the streets having their voting rights blockaded by a variety of means, continued economic and educational opportunities diminished by years of inequalities, redlining, all of that. So what lessons have we learned, and how do you see Black people moving forward and the nation as a whole, given everything we know and we're seeing, recently? Should we be optimistic?
I would say yes. The thing that we have to accept is that history sometimes repeats itself. And when we look at the challenges that we have in our today's society, we see some of the remnants, okay, of the past. And we come to realize that things don't just happen, okay, because things happen. No, they are brought to bear. One of the things that's important for us to realize during this period is that we have large numbers of young white people and people of other colors and ethnic groups and that kind of thing joining together with African Americans, and look at the crowds. Look like the March on Washington. I mean, when you look at the photos and the pictures of all of these, okay, uh, people who are not necessarily Black, and we have to recognize the fact that we have more in common than not. We are one. And when we began to see that, then those differences that we have don't make a difference. Because ultimately, we come from the same roots. Yeah, okay? And we have the same purpose in life. And that's why we cannot make decisions based on the color of somebody's skin or the shape of their nose or the texture of their hair, okay, the color of their eyes, and all these other kinds of, physical characteristics. And one of the things that we still have to be proud of now, okay, here in our country, we still represent the model and the example of what we can become. And we stick to it. And that's why these battles, okay, even the politics, and I don't get involved in that in this discussion, but yeah, it didn't just happen. It's because people came together and supported what they believed, was a good cause and represent them. And so we come back. Sometimes we forget that we had a Black president for 2 terms. Yeah, that's right. It can happen. So my point is, and right now we got a what? African American vice president and a woman. And that's the other thing I want to make a point on here. In addition to young people coming forth, young whites and young, Hispanics and Asians and all other kind of groups coming together, all right, they are also saying that Black lives matter because we experienced this horrific, efforts in taking the lives of Black people, period. So people are not satisfied. They're not going to accept that. They're going to take a stand. Not all people, but we have a significant number of people who are taking a stand. And we have to re-educate them in many ways, some of the other people. Now, the 2 points I want to make. One is that we cannot simply rely on the experiences that people have to make them who they are. We cannot simply rely on the experiences. What's more important than the experience is the individual interpretation. That's why we have to focus on our young people. We can't assume, no, that because they come out of a particular culture or whatever, that they are going to behave or think a certain way. We have to now more than ever, especially since they have these little play toys that they use, okay, and little games that they play, and they're preoccupied with those things. We have to make sure that we break away and have time to talk to our children, our young people. We have to try to figure out how they are interpreting their experiences. Because their interpretation of the experiences will make the person, not the experience alone. It's what they take away from that experience, is how they interpret, okay, what they see and what they experience. And that's why we got the institutionalized nonviolence. That's what Martin Luther King said. The second point, you got the institutionalized nonviolence. It's like we teach people how to communicate and how to read and write. We have to teach them how to think other. Because if you just think about yourself, your thoughts are limited. But we are a community. We belong to each other, not just happen to fall in place somewhere. No, we belong to each other. Okay, we are a community. We are a people. That's the thing that we are. And those other physical differences cannot determine our relationship with each other. So we have to teach people that so that they can be able to appreciate that. And we can't assume it. That's why we have to put nonviolence into our institutions. Yes, educational institutions and every other institution where we can find people communicating together. So, with that, I'd like to stop and maybe take another question. But the main answer to the questions that you asked is that we have to be willing to make sacrifices. We've got to be willing to give our lives if we're going to receive the best of life.
Thank you. Those are very powerful words. If you looked in the chat box, you would see many people saying similar things. Important message. And this is being recorded for everyone to know, so this message can continue on and more people can access it. So this is an opportunity if a couple of you, we don't have a huge amount of time, but if a couple of people want to ask a question, I think Kelly could monitor them, but please, it's your chance, and please put them in the chat box.
Dr. Lafayette, this is Kelly. We did have a question that was specifically related to how your faith journey informed your commitment to nonviolence. If you could speak about that for a few minutes.
Yes. Well, as I was a little boy with my grandmother, she always told me that I was going to be a preacher. Well, you know, at age 7, and she said the reason why she knew this is because she saw the mark in my forehead. And I used to stay in the mirror looking, for this mark in my forehead. The only thing I found was where I had the chicken pox, you know. That's the only mark I could find. But she said that was the case. So that's why I ended up going to the seminary because she's the one that got me there. By the way, I had gotten a 4-year scholarship in journalism at Florida A&M, okay, in Tallahassee. Yeah, because I was the editor of our a newspaper in high school, and we won first place in the state of Florida in 1958. And the editor got a 4-year scholarship. But instead of going to this 4-year scholarship, I had a work scholarship to American Baptist College, okay? So the thing that was so amazing to me was to find that while we were studying our scripture and that sort of thing, etc., this whole concept of love, and it was extraordinary. So it's beyond our imagination that someone could love like that. But more importantly, love could be put into action related to social change. Oh my goodness, you didn't have to separate, you know, your politics from your religion or whatever. No, this whole idea of a new and complete and the wholeness that you found in nonviolence and love coming together. And it was not something that you could just imagine or say it was in your heart that you love somebody, but you could put it into action. You could put love into your feet. Imagine having loving feet when you're marching, okay? And demonstrating, okay? Yeah. So that became just miraculous to me, marvelous. The fact that there was a relationship between faith and social change. In fact, you could not bring about the kind of social change that you needed to bring about unless you incorporated that faith.
I was muted. Other questions? Well, I could ask another one. In some ways, you've answered this. So is racism kind of intrinsic to our culture, various cultures? Can our attitudes just, does it just take time? Is it sort of this evolutionary thing? Is it a process that just has a very long time frame for people to shift?
And in terms of learning to appreciate people who might be of different cultures and ethnic groups and that kind of thing? Is that the question I'm trying?
Yeah, I mean, it seems, again, as I said earlier, we've made so much progress, but then there seems to be so much more progress to go. Does racism evolve in a positive trajectory? Can it?
It can change. And I think that the thing that I'm looking at now, as I look at the actions on the part of the masses of people, and I don't want to neglect saying this because I'm getting older now and there's some things that people need to know. One of the things we need to know is that the leadership that women are taking now is one of the things that's going to make a big difference. Women have always participated and had, some contribution to make, etc. But I'm talking about leadership. and that's extremely important. Women are better organizers than men. They have more nodules on their brain, which means that they can deal with complicated situations and deal with complex situations. Like playing jazz, you get some women playing jazz, okay, because they can do more than one thing at the same time, multitask. They can cook and they can clean up and they can take care of the baby, take care of the grandmother, get the medicine for the grandfather, whatever. So my point is they're multitask. That's why they can carry on 3 conversations at the same time. Men usually say, well, could you just wait? I'm trying to listen to what this person is saying over here. Could you, whatever? No, women could carry on 3 I know because I have 5 sisters. Carry on 3 conversations at the same time. Multitask. Organizing. Oh, if you want something organized, that's where we go to. That's the go-to group. So as they step forward, the impact is going to be revolutionary. And I'm looking at it now, and I just want to stay around long enough to see it happens. Okay? And the influence and the important thing that we see happening here. And so the racism that we see, it doesn't have to be that way. That's what I mean by people interpreting their experiences. And that's why we have to talk to our children because, by the way, all these people who are shooting and killing other folks, they are somebody's children. What happened? Somebody's children. And they grew up and decided they were gonna, okay, take the lives of other people. No, can't do that. We've got to find a better way of dealing and approaching our problems. And we have to find that way without contributing to taking the lives of others. We can't continue to do that. And so what we have to do is engage people, as Martin Luther King says, and I repeat myself, institutionalize nonviolence so that they cannot escape being exposed to nonviolence. And nonviolence is, simply put, the loving way to accomplish our goals.
So we do have a follow-up question to that, Dr. Lafayette. How can you engage with someone who considers violence an acceptable means of communication? So if we want to model and engage in the nonviolent communication, what happens when you come up against someone who doesn't share that same philosophy?
Well, it means that you have to engage the person in such a way that you show them a better example. You show them a better example so that you're always projecting your goal. And your goal is to help people change. So you have to be that change that you expect them to be. So they have to see something different. What happens when people commit violence is that they dehumanize their so-called victims. They don't see you as being worthwhile. They don't see you as being a loving human being that's capable of giving them something that they need. In fact, the more a person is prepared to take the life of another person means that they dehumanize that victim. Simultaneously, they dehumanize themselves. So the stick that you see, the battle, that kind of thing, and the gun, they are not extensions of the person's arm. Those weapons, no. Their arms are extensions of the weapons. To that extent, they dehumanize themselves. And the more they're able to dehumanize themselves and dehumanize their victims, then you have a simultaneous dehumanization taking place. That's why you have to insist on being a loving human being. My Selma example, don't shoot, Fred. Now the rest of that story is that FBI came to me, and I named the FBI in my book, a week later and told me that there was a three-state conspiracy and they had planned this group that attacked me. They were part of a three-state conspiracy that was planned in New Orleans, and I was beaten up the same night that Medgar Evers was shot and killed in Mississippi. That was no coincidence. Ben Elton Cox, who worked with the Congress of Racial Equality, was also planned, they planned to kill him in New Orleans or Louisiana that same night. There were three states, they call it a tri-state conspiracy. Okay? So when you think about it, had I resisted in some way, other than the way I did, I would have been victimized. They planned to lure me down in the further down the road where a mob was waiting on me. Yeah, they were going to do an Emmett Till. That's what they said. Now, the lesson here is that we must not surrender to violence. We must combat it. And the way we combat the violence is that we show the powerful essence of nonviolence. And we resist the violence that way, not combat it their way, but resist it nonviolently.
Thank you for that answer. A few of the people have commented in the chat that where we are in the northwest corner of Connecticut, it's a very homogenous area. We have a lack of diversity. It's a very white community. And so we can't really say that we see a lot of violence that we have to engage with, that we have to practice nonviolence, that we model this love and this compassion. So what can we do when we see this violence out there in the bigger part of the world? Is there anything we can do here from home that takes us a step beyond what you're talking about?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question. Yeah. There are several things you could do. Number one, it's important to work with our children, as I mentioned, and help them to interpret these things in the best positive way we can. The next thing we must do is go to our sources that represent us, okay? The people who we elect to help to shape and run this country. And then we must look carefully at the decisions that they're making and whether or not those decisions are going to contribute to the change that we see. As I pointed out earlier, the white people are the ones who voted for the Civil Rights Bill and the Voters' Rights Bill, because especially the Voters' Rights Bill, because black folks weren't represented, okay, in the legislature. So it was the whites who did that. Yeah. Well, we actually participated in, bringing this thing to the conscience of people, and white people participated in that as well. The Freedom Rides, oh my goodness, look at the Freedom Rides. We had 11 countries represented on the Freedom Rides, by the way. So we're not just talking about our country, we're talking about a global community. And that's what Martin Luther King was talking about when he went to the mountaintop and he looked over and he saw the promised land. See, I may not get there, but we as a people will get to the promised land. He was talking about a global community because we live in a global community. This is where we rest. Okay? I was with him. The morning of the assassination, I was with Martin Luther King. And he told me, because I was going to Washington to do a press conference for Martin Luther King. They opened up the headquarters on 14th and U, headquarters for the Poor People's Campaign. Martin Luther King stayed in Memphis to do the march over again. He told me to go ahead because he had appointed me the national coordinator. And he told me that as I walked out of the door, okay, at 3:06 in Lorraine Hotel, he said, now the next move that we're going to have, Lafayette, is to institutionalize and internationalize nonviolence. So no matter where you live in terms of your community, no matter what status you have, no matter what color you have, no matter whatever, no matter, we have found a way, we have to find a way to help make this a better world. That's the contribution that makes us worthwhile. And that's wow when we can do that. We're not going to live forever, okay? But while we are here, let's do all we can to help make a difference. Every movement we've had, we always had whites involved, no matter where they lived, where they come from. Find a way to make a difference.
Thank you. I think we're all feeling our hearts and our minds inspired by your words. And if for those of you who are still on the Zoom call, I would encourage you to check out our chat because we are having a very lively discussion. And there's just some really wonderful sentiments and some eye-opening information in there. So please, I would encourage you to look at that.
Well, unless anyone else has a really burning question, Dr. Lafayette has been generous with his time and his words of wisdom. And we are a little after 8 o'clock already. So I'll give 1 minute if someone has something really burning, but he'd probably like to. Take it easy.
I'm here.
Well, of course, there's a lot of thank yous in the box and appreciation, and I thank you. It's wonderful and inspirational to hear your wisdom and heartfelt words. And on behalf of all the libraries and the audience, we thank you so much for your life's work and teaching us more about nonviolence.
Certainly appreciate what you're doing. It will make a difference.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lafayette. And you've got thank yous and applause and thank yous and God bless and all wonderful comments in the comment box. So,
Thank you. I appreciate you.
and again, just to reiterate, I can't remember exactly what I said, but we are recording this. The Scoville Library does have a YouTube channel. I will try to get it up there in the next day or two. If you just, Google Scoville YouTube channel. It's not actually on our website, but I think most of you will be able to find it fairly easily. And if anyone can't find it, email one of the libraries and we'll get you a link. So thank you and good night all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Lafayette.
Thank you.
Very much. It was fabulous.
Thanks, Doc.
Thank you.
Okay.
Dr.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you as always. Thank you, everyone.
See you, Doc. Good seeing you.
Oh, okay. Thank
Love
you.
you, Doc. Love the Kate.
Okay. Thank you. I will.
Are an inspiration. We adore you. Thank you.
Well, appreciate you too. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Oh, yep.
Thank you, Lawrence, and thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Gretchen, and thank you to all the libraries here that have put together. It was fabulous. Norfolk Library as well. Thank you very, very much. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Victoria.
Yeah,
We appreciate you and the work you're doing. So
right. We'll be in touch.
we'll
Let's
do
bring-
something, we will, and we'll do something else together.
Okay, I'd love that. Yeah.
Thank
Definitely.
you, Dr. Lafayette. We love you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Doc, get some rest after that huge hurricane in Tuskegee last night.
Oh, yeah. That's
You need to
right.
get some rest. No kidding. Up all night. Your house was not hit. That was a blessing. Yeah.
Oh, that was a great lesson, really.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Doc.
Right.
Night.
Night.
Pat and Melinda in Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you.